Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Joe. He's Nick. You almost jumped in there, right, Nick?
I almost did. I just finished saying you can bring us in tonight, and then I just about leapt all over you.
Joseph, you bring us in tonight. Okay. I'm Joe. He's Nick, and you are listening and watching the Nick and Joe Show.
You know what? I
Blaster
like this
Radio.
format.
Pardon me?
I like this format.
You like that format? Yeah.
Yep.
People get to watch your hunting hat there, your camouflage hat.
I'm all set, buddy.
I was watching a comedy skit earlier today, and they were talking about how great the down in the States, how great the camouflage uniforms are for the Marines and the Army and all that stuff.
That's where they got them,
right? Of course, and then they were kind of asking, but what's the point of wearing those green camouflage uniforms when you're in the Air Force and you're on an Air Force base?
Or on an aircraft carrier.
Well, yeah, it's sort of like the enemy spy satellites come over, right? And as they're coming over, you realize it. So instead of everyone running for cover, they freeze and pretend they're like a tree.
Yeah, that'll work. And ask them where they got the uniforms. Those are Canadian MatPat uniforms, I believe.
There you go. See, Canada. Hey, I saw something interesting today driving down the street. I was driving behind a utility van that was a Canadian Forces utility van. And it was a Mercedes-Benz van.
Really?
Yeah, I had not heard that the military had invested in Mercedes-Benz vehicles, but it occurred to me. Well, I mean, obviously, Mercedes-Benz had to meet the whatever the criteria was for bidding on the job, if there was a bid, for instance, and the price had to be right as well. So I'm not, by making this observation, I am not suggesting any kind of malfeasance or anything like that. I just thought it was interesting because, there I was, a nice, you know how it is, the dark olive color of the vehicle. Even the license plate is, green on green, right? But there's that nice shiny Mercedes-Benz star on the back, right?
Yeah, let's hide in the trees with that. Yeah, good idea.
So, anyway, there it is.
You know what's funny? Because I was watching the defense minister just before the show talk about upgrading to brigade strength in Latvia and how they have a battery of artillery over there. And boy, oh boy, you the Russians better watch out because the Canadians are on their way. Well, I'm sure a whole brigade, there's only 3 in the whole country. That's 1/3 of our army going over to Latvia.
Well, and it's, I have to say, Nick, we hadn't intended on opening by talking about this, but now that you've broached the subject, with Sweden and Finland now looking like they're going to be joining NATO, so they haven't just said they want to, but in the NATO meetings that have just finished, the NATO allies have formally invited them to join. So it seems to me that that's going to be fast tracked. And we've talked about this over a period of time now, and I'm a little concerned about this because it's the obvious. I mean, if we believe this is going to deter any further action on the part of the Russians, fine. I'm not sure that I buy into that logic. I mean, I really haven't heard the logic behind all of that. But I will say this: if I'm Putin, I'm thinking to myself, okay, if you're going to expand NATO now to include Finland and Sweden, and again, let me stress, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but I am concerned that the next Russian step, of course, is to invade, or I should say, re-invade the Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and of course we have Canadian troops, as you just made the observation there. And so I don't know. There are times when in this whole conflict where I've felt that we are sort of stumbling along here in the West, trying to figure out what we're going to do and choosing what in the moment seems to be the best strategic thing to do, but there doesn't seem to be, and again, it's easy for me to say this, I'm not involved in any of the meetings or anything like that, right? I'm just being a pundit, but it just seems to me that, we're stumbling along a little bit in the dark. and we don't have a clear sense of what at this stage now that the war has been going on for a while. We were unable to deter the Russians. What exactly is our strategic objective now, and how does this help to promote it, or
Well,
does this in fact precipitate further escalation of the conflict on the part of the Russians?
well, here's what I think. I think what we're looking at is repeat of history. Now, the particulars are different than they were in 1930, the late 1930s up until 1939, but overall, it's the same problems. What's the best strategy? How do we go about, deterring then Hitler, now Putin, from more aggressive action? What do we do? And typically, this is how the West responds to crisis. They don't have the long range thinking. A lot of them would argue that they do, but obviously here we are. The war is now well over 100 days old. It's pushing probably 120 by now, and by modern standards, with a conflict of this scale, that's a significant contribution of any of the Russian military and of all the weapons and from the West, if you want. Barely short of NATO getting involved. I mean, one wrong pull of the trigger, and we've started World War III. Nobody wants that. And the other major difference, if I can point one out, is back in 1939 they didn't have nuclear weapons to worry about. Today we do. Right. So that's one significant difference. But in general, we're playing the same game we always play. We try to do the most with the least and hope the other guy takes our threat seriously, because technologically, there's no question about which side is more advanced and which side is able to, has more sting in the end of its fist. But the difference is, in Russia, they don't care about that. They will sit back with their artillery, just like they're doing now, and just like they did back in the days of Operation Barbarossa during World War II, and they will pound a target to pieces with artillery. And then they'll pound it to pieces again. And then they'll send in the infantry, and they'll clean up who's ever left alive. So you've got a situation now where Russia's doing exactly the same thing they're doing now that they did then. And it doesn't matter how good the Ukrainians are, because 10 guys who are sharpshooters against 1,000 guys who just have 5 rounds in a rifle still lose. It doesn't matter. It was the same thing with the Germans during World War II. They had better tanks, they had better aircraft, especially the beginning of the war. And as the war progressed, they had better submarines. They had, everything they had was better, but they didn't have the volume. And Russia now is throwing volume at them, and they can't overcome that just by technological advancements alone.
Right. Well, and you're talking tactically right now. My mind is still in the strategic problem.
Well, I think it was blending the two, to tell you the truth.
Okay, fair enough. So what I'm getting at is, okay, now that we failed in the West catastrophically to deter the Russians, and now that they've invaded Ukraine, and now that it's clear that they're going to continue the war until they have achieved whatever their objectives are.
Well, once Putin can claim victory, that's when the war will stop. But until then, you can forget it.
So my question is, what is it that we want to do? I mean, ultimately, do we want to continue the war and have some sort of a stalemate? Do we want to basically say to the Russians, okay, we'll let you have Ukraine, notwithstanding what the Ukrainians themselves are saying? And of course, that seems to be off the table now, because
we're too committed now to Ukraine to do that.
Well, we could change our minds. I'm not advocating that. I'm not suggesting that we're going to, or that we should, but it's certainly an option that's always on the table. Until it's not. So there are options, but it just seems to me, again, I mean, the fact that I'm hesitant here just goes to show you how difficult the problem is, and you know, everybody's saying, well, we can't let the Russians win, and I'm very sympathetic to that. But does that mean that ultimately, if the Russians continue this, or looks like they're finally going to win the confrontation in Ukraine, that somehow we're going to get involved? And you see, this is ultimately, this is, when you go back and you look at the late 1930s, okay, um, again, there was not an attempt until too late to deter the Germans.
Right.
And by the time that that they had adopted a policy of deterrence, the Germans were not going to be deterred anymore. I mean, that's
kind of
part
where
two,
we are
right?
now.
Yeah, that's sort of where we are now. So the alternative, there was only one choice left to the Western allies, and when I say that, I'm not including the United States, at least at first, in that equation, and that was, yeah, you know what, we're going to have to fight them. That was all that was left. You either fight them, or you let them continue to do what they're doing. And you know, what if? I don't want to play the what if game, but who knows? Maybe if the French and the British had not declared war on Germany in 1939 when they invaded Poland, who knows? Maybe Germany would not have turned and fought France and fought Britain. These are imponderables. I think that they took the right decision, and I think that based on the evidence that, you know, you couldn't trust Germany under the National Socialist government under Hitler's leadership. Fair enough, but can you trust the Russians at this stage under Putin's um, uh, um, leadership? Because
I
he's
think you have to draw
clearly demonstrated. I don't think he's got a screw loose or anything. You're hearing that kind of thing. I think that he's made a calculation, and I think the calculation he's made is that he has his strategic interests, and he's prepared to go to war in order to achieve those interests. Are we prepared to go to war to block him from achieving those interests? And what are those interests?
Well,
So those are the big questions.
You're absolutely right. Those are the questions, because there's no doubt that Putin wants to. I think he's looking for a way out, but it's got to be one where he doesn't lose face, and he can turn to his people and say, "We won." And to them, because after Afghanistan and some of the other regional conflicts where they have not done well, their weapons platforms do not perform well. All they have is a lot of them, and that's the problem. So. I think some of the comments made in the different in the comment sections are on spot on. Like Greg just said, you know, Putin's already at war. We need to face that fact that he's at war with the West, not just Ukraine. And I tend to agree with him. But the question becomes, from a Western Hemisphere point of view, from the United States, Canada, and the other countries that inhabit this half of the globe, are we willing to put enough boots on the ground and take the kinds of losses it's going to entail in order to push Putin out of Ukraine? Because let's not forget something. Ukraine's not a democracy. It's not like they invaded Switzerland. Okay, it's not the same thing. Putin, or not Putin, Zelensky is, I hesitate to call him a dictator, but he's not that far off. He wasn't, before the war, he was banning political protest and different political parties and not behaving in a very democratic way. Now, I'm on his side because Russia crossed his border with guns blazing. So from that point of view, I'm sympathetic to the Ukrainians. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking this is like taking on Poland in 1939. You're taking on another country that was one of the most corrupt on the planet as far as gun smuggling and money laundering and all that kind of thing happens. So we have to be very careful who we support. Like there's that old saying, he may be a thug, but he's my thug. You know,
Right.
how far down that road do we want to go?
I think it's important to also know that Poland was not exactly a model democracy in 1939 either. So the issue was not freedom for Poles. I mean, that might have been the rhetoric, but the issue really was stopping Hitler
Yeah.
from the practices that he was engaged in, and that was, invading his neighboring countries. I mean that was the strategic goal of going to war against him, is that you couldn't trust him. He had already broken a number of treaties that he had signed in solemn agreements, and so when he says, "Well, I'm not going," if he was to say, "I'm not going to invade France," who's going to believe him? And
Well,
so
that's the problem.
they ended up in a situation where they appeased him for a period of time, and when appeasement failed, they went to deterrence. But by the time they went to deterrence, there was no deterring him, and so the only option that was left to the Western Allies was to actually go to war and to fight a war with him to stop it. And that in fact is what they did. Again, is that on the table here with the Russians? I think that the strategic situation is very different in that, as you mentioned before, Nick, we're not talking about fighting a conventional war. We're talking about potentially a nuclear war.
At least
So
on
do
a
you want to?
tactical level, yeah.
So do you want to get into a shooting war with the Russians, um, uh, with their nuclear weapons? Uh, I don't know, but it's a very dangerous situation, and sitting on the sidelines watching all of this carefully has to be China, and they're taking lessons from how we're handling this whole situation. So
Yeah.
I my fear, to the degree that I have any fear, it's that our leaders are stumbling along from one what looks like the best solution to a week later what looks like the best solution that week to next week what's going to look like the best solution there. And I don't think they have a clear idea
Well, when you've
of
got
what our
two
objective is and having a clear strategy to achieve those objectives.
when you have two weak leaders like run the West right now between Trudeau and Biden, let's face it, they are not Ronald Reagan. They're not Churchill. They're not even Trump, because this never would have happened under Trump. And people can hate Trump all they want, but that's the truth, whether
Probably
or
not.
not it would have happened. And if it did happen, the response would have been far different.
Well,
So,
probably. I mean, the fact
okay,
is that
you're right.
I think
Probably. We
he's.
don't know that for sure.
I think Trump is the key to understanding, or in this case, Trump's unpredictability probably would have been an asset.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that Biden is predictable, and he's predictably weak, and as a consequence of that, anything that he might have said at the time would have virtually zero deterrent effect.
Well, you have to ask yourself a question. If you don't trust Putin, do you trust Biden? Because Biden can say whatever he wants. He has a very bad habit of not following up the way he says he's going to. The great uniter, all this. You could run down a whole list of things that he's gotten wrong. I can't think of anything he's gotten right. And then you turn to Justin Trudeau, north, in the north, and look at him in Canada, where Stephen Harper, whether you like Stephen Harper or not, was 10 times the leader that Justin Trudeau is on the world stage and was widely respected. Trudeau gets shunned at these international conventions and so on. The G7, nobody wants to talk to him. You go to these different NATO meetings and nobody wants to talk to him. They all turn away and talk to each other and ignore him. That didn't happen under Harper because there was a certain level of respect that we've lost. So you got two weak leaders in the West who can't, they pay lip service to things, but there's all steak and there's all sizzle and there's no steak. And that's the problem we have when dealing with a guy like Putin, who's all steak and no sizzle.
Right.
When he says, look, I'm going to, you can count on it. He is most likely going to do it.
Well, here's another thing that I think that we have to be cognizant of. And it doesn't really affect us that much in North America. But, the Europeans, particularly Western Europeans, I think I think they were frankly mad to allow themselves to be maneuvered into a position where they were dependent, or they essentially became dependent on the Russians for their energy needs. And you know,
Talk about
it's
weakness.
well, it's I don't know what was behind that. I know that in government circles and diplomatic circles, I've heard so often the argument that the way that you encourage civil liberties and respect for human rights in some of these countries is by engaging them, particularly economically. And I've always felt that was a badly flawed argument, because ultimately, when you have a situation as we have now in Europe, where you've engaged and invested so much in these countries, in partly in the hope, or partly in the belief that that engagement is going to encourage them to be more respectful of human rights, to be more democratic, to have greater freedom in their societies. And but when the chips are down, okay, uh, they don't care about the potential economic consequences
Well, I
to their
think you're.
country and their people as a
I
so you say, well, we're going to invoke sanctions, okay? And if you're a Putin, you're basically saying, okay, so what? What, you're going to impoverish my people? I don't care. They don't care. You don't have
Well,
you don't see
they have no benchmark to measure poverty against.
largely
Most
so.
Russians have no idea what the lifestyle is like in the rest of the world. Same thing with a lot of other communist dictatorships. They just, and I know a lot of people say Russia's not communist. Well, guess what? You can say that all you
No.
want, but the truth is the roots of that system run deep in that country and affect the mindset of the people that live there. But if the West really was interested in securing Europe against famine, against energy starvation, against all these other things, we would turn inwards to what we have here in North America. We get back, and I'm going to get into oil shortages and all that sort of stuff in the upcoming segments. But just as a kind of a teaser for that, if we were energy independent and then could export the excess, we could do it a lot to alleviate the impact of Russia rationing the oil to Europe to get them to go his way. But we haven't done that. We are not interested. When I say we, I'm talking about the government. They'd rather see us pay $10 a gallon for gas, and that's what it is right now, and more. $10 a gallon. My dad always used to say that's why we went metric. Wasn't because it was a better system. It's so they could hide the price increases in the price of gas. Because if you're only raising it 2 or 3 cents a liter, it's not 30 or 40 cents a gallon. So, I think he was onto something. Anyway, the point is we have massive areas of agriculture. We have all kinds of, we really are one of the great bread baskets of the world. But the people who run this place right now, on both sides of the border, have no interest in doing anything along that line. They have some kind of green globalist agenda that they're working for, the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and all those people. They would rather serve them than they would the people who elected them.
Don't sugarcoat it, Nick. Give it to us straight.
Okay, buddy. Well, you wait till you hear the next round. Anyway,
Yeah,
I'm just
our oil, our energy is our energy market is so badly screwed up for a number of reasons. We could easily be energy independent in this country. We
under
produce
Trump, the U.S. was.
well, we produce already. We produce enough energy to be energy independent, but there are, and we'll get into this in the next segment perhaps, but there are reasons why we still end up importing oil. But the good news is that we're not, contrary to some of the things that I've heard, we're not importing Russian oil. Okay, we don't import Russian oil here in Canada.
No, we get it from the really nice people over in Saudi Arabia.
Well, most of our oil is Canadian, and we do import a certain amount from Saudi Arabia, but it's still a small amount. I'd have to check the numbers, but most of the oil we import. Well, let's save it for the second segment, okay? Because that
We're
way,
running out of
this
time
is
to
our
do that
teaser,
justice.
okay? Because
Yep.
we're radio professionals. So if you wanna hear what we have to say about Canada's energy production, you're just going to have to tune into segment number 2.
I'll also tease with another in one of the upcoming segments. I really want to get into the impact of the Roe v. Wade decision in the Supreme Court and what Justin Trudeau has to say about it. I've got a clip about that we'll play for people and for the listener and the viewer. And I also want to talk about the investigation into the shooting in Nova Scotia with the RCMP and the commissioner and Bill Blair and the Ministry of Public Safety or whatever his ministerial portfolio is. That issue should have toppled the government all by itself. It's so egregious because you're messing around with a police investigation by officials who should easily have known better and didn't. So we'll talk about that as well. And we also have, what else is on my little card here? Oh yeah, oil supply I talked about.
No, we haven't talked about it much yet.
No, we've hinted at it.
Oh, okay.
Part of the game, part of that whole conversation is we keep asking the Saudis and the oil OPEC countries to up production. Well, guess what? It's very likely there's not much more room for expansion because they can't. There's only so much fuel they can change from crude oil into the different lighter weight fuels, whether it be avgas or whether it be diesel or regular gasoline, whatever it is. There's only so much capacity for that, and they are suggesting they might be topped out. So now what? So we'll play with that a little bit. And of course, we're going to have some more fun with who knows whatever else crosses our fertile mind. Just in the last moment or so before we go to break, you and I were talking before the show about security, about getting into your laptop when you forget your PIN. I mean, you were talking about that. And there's a whole conversation built right there. I mean, if you
there's a whole
lose
comedy
PIN,
routine built right there.
What's that?
I said there's a whole stand-up comedy routine.
Yeah, you imagine getting somebody like Jeff Foxworthy to do a stand-up comedy routine about getting into your laptop, or what's the guy get her done? What's his name? The redneck there, Bill White, not Bill White, the other guy. I can't think. There's Engvall. There was Engvall would do a great job of it too. And you've got Canadian comedians like the guy who came from India talking about his dad trying to barbecue rice on a barbecue. Kept falling through the grades. That was a hilarious piece. He could do a bang up job of it too. Anyway, with that said, Jeff Foxworthy could do a brilliant job of it. All right, with that said, we will take our little break. We'll be back with more right after this on the Nick and Joe Show. Don't go anywhere, folks. We're just getting warmed up.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right. Welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. He's Joe. I'm Nick. And this is the best 2 hours of conservative talk radio on the internet. And yes, that includes everybody. Mark, thank you very much. It is Larry the Cable Guy I was trying to think of, who could do a great comedy skit on trying. I can just hear him now. Did you know he's actually from Wisconsin and has no Southern accent at all when he's not on stage?
Oh, well, that's a backwoods Wisconsin accent.
Oh, is that what that is? It sounded like something out of Louisiana to me.
I really don't know.
No, they had him on an interview. He was on one of these late night talk shows one night, and he sounded just like you and I. And they asked him about the accent, and he flipped right into it, rolled right into it, and all of a sudden it's as thick as tar, and just he's hilarious. He's one of my favorite comedians. That guy, him and John Panesh, not John Panesh. What was his name? The guy who did 80 buffets around the world, around the world in 80 buffets.
I think that's what his name was.
Was John Panesh?
Yeah.
Oh God, he was funny. Too bad he passed away at 52 or something, but he was grossly overweight, and that was a big part of his act. Anyway, comedy aside, we were hinting at Canadian oil production, and you were teasing people with it. So I'm going to let you pick the ball up there and run with it.
Oh, you see,
he gives me that look.
You're
going to do what?
I don't mean to give you any look. Okay.
Okay.
Honestly, I'm just looking. Actually, if you'll give me a second, I should have done this already.
Well, while you dig that up, let me read from an article on the international level. This comes from, I'll give you the website here in a second. I just got to scroll to the top. This is from Investors Business Daily. So the article is built around investing in crude oil and whether or not it's a good idea. But down in the article, just the last few paragraphs read this way. A majority of the oil and gas executives believe U.S. crude oil production will grow by around 800,000 barrels per day by December 2022. On average, respondents also expect an oil price of about $108 per barrel by the end of the year. Many of the executives polled seem concerned about the industry despite strong underlying fundamentals. Investors are still not coming back to the well, so to speak, an executive told the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas. Another executive commented that the real energy crisis hasn't even hit yet. This executive said the U.S. Energy Information Administration's forecast that U.S. oil production will average 12.5 million barrels per day for the next 30 years is all but impossible. Shale will likely tip into terminal decline in around 5 years as the main plays runs out of locations, according to this executive. Unfortunately, by then, most individuals with incumbent knowledge about offshore and in international development will have retired. The brain drain in the industry will create a real and much larger crisis in the mid to late 2020s. So that's good news. No, it's not. But it's what they're hinting at is they can't drill because Biden won't let them. He says they have 9,000 permits, but he's not approving any. You know, he's talking about how all they got to do is drill. The problem is he won't let them. There's been no approval of new drilling that I'm aware of anywhere in the continental United States or in its territories.
Right.
So what's he talking about? And unless they start unmothballing some of these refineries locally, domestically, both here in Canada and in the United States, I have no idea how they're going to make up the shortfall, because that's what's driving prices through the roof, is the fact there's more people wanting gas than there is gas available.
Right. And that is that's a real concern.
It is.
For sure, because that is the number one driver of high prices, is a high demand and a low availability.
Well, that's what drives prices up.
But that's, frankly, that's what OPEC is all about. OPEC has been always been about reducing or regulating or keeping the product, the extraction of oil, okay, the amount of oil on the market low in order to keep prices up. And, we benefit from that here in Canada to a degree as well, because higher oil prices translate into greater revenue for
Only if you're
Canadian oil
exporting it.
producers. And we export it. We export to the United States. Now, in terms of the amount of oil that we import, okay, we import oil, but in 2021, close to 80% of the oil that we imported was actually from the United States. So 77% from the United States, 13% from Saudi Arabia, 4% from Nigeria, 3% from Norway of all places, and then 3% from everywhere else. So we're not importing Russian oil. We're not importing a lot of oil from other countries. The two big ones. The big one is the United States, and then followed, which is only a fraction of what the Americans are sending us, and that is Saudi Arabia. Between those two, that's 80% of the oil. Sorry, 90%.
Well, let me stop you and ask
oil.
you something there, Joseph. Based on what you've been finding out, the oil that we're taking back from the Americans, is that refined product or is it crude?
Well, that's a great question, and that sort of is getting into the crux of the problem that we have here in Canada, is that we actually have tremendous energy reserves.
Mm-hmm.
We have tremendous oil reserves, natural gas reserves, and coal reserves.
Yep.
And so we have the capacity to be absolutely energy independent here in Canada, and we produce enough energy to be energy independent. But what we can't do is we cannot, because of our government policies, and it's not just the federal government, okay? We can't get our oil to the markets, okay? Principally, we can't get enough of our oil to the West Coast. We can't get our natural gas, enough of it to the West Coast. We cannot export enough of our oil because we can't get it to those coasts. And the East Coast is a huge problem as well. And that's because we're not allowed to build pipelines that are necessary in order to get the oil to the markets. And something. So what ends up happening is European countries ultimately end up being dependent on Russian natural gas or Russian oil, and which, by the way, is produced if you're worried about climate change and the possibility that we're contributing as human beings to accelerated climate change, etc. If that's a legitimate concern, if you're really worried about that, then you should be in favor of pipelines, and you should be in favor of getting Canadian oil and even American oil to these markets. But
there's even a more
we're not.
Basic reason to promote the idea of pipelines than exporting. Remember Lac Megantic? I mean, we were shipping oil in rail cars.
It's the
and
safest
look what
way.
happened.
Yeah,
it's
pipelines are.
If you care about the environment, if you care about personal safety, pipelines are by far and away the most safe way of transporting a flammable product, whether it be natural gas, whether it be propane, whether it be crude or some level of refined crude, things like that. If you're going to move a flammable fluid, a pipeline is really the only way to go. And you don't need to get very sophisticated to figure that out.
Okay, so
but yet Trudeau, I'll let you back in a second here.
Sure.
Trudeau and Biden have killed every pipeline project. The first thing Sleepy Joe did in office was cancel XL Pipeline. He said, nope, that's it, we're done. And we have the problem with the state of Michigan. I don't know what the status is of that number 5 pipeline that they're talking about, which serves most of Eastern Canada to refineries located in Sarnia and Petrolia. But you got to ask yourself, what kind of drugs are these people on? I mean, do they not understand never mind the economics? What about just the safety? It's about as dumb as not putting your seatbelt on.
So let me just, first of all, when it comes to transporting oil, you're absolutely right. Pipeline transportation of oil is by far and away the safest, environmentally safest, and the safest in terms of handling, as the disaster in Lac Mégantic will remind us. But people worry about liquefied natural gas. Well, I have some news for people. Natural gas doesn't spill into the environment if there's a leak in the pipeline. Okay. So you don't even have any kind of a risk of a spill, because even though it's in liquid form, the minute it escapes into the atmosphere,
it turns back to a
gas. It turns into a gas which is lighter than air, and it dissipates immediately. So it's and we were talking before the show about politicians not understanding some basic engineering principles, some basic construction principles, basic chemistry and physics principles. To a large degree, our politicians today, especially the younger they get, and it's I'm not throwing stones at younger people. I'm just saying that they've been shortchanged on basic education. We're so concerned about giving them an education in social attitudes and what their proper thinking ought to be, and what proper language these days ought to be, and all of these things. Okay, it's all virtue signaling. Education has become so much about virtue signaling and so little about actual content. Okay, and so if somebody were to come to me, if I was in politics, and were to say to me, "Oh, you have to vote against this natural gas pipeline because we're afraid of the effect on the environment. We could have leaks." I'd say, you don't know what you're talking about. Of course, you're not going to have an environmental damage done by a leak of natural gas. So that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be worried about leaking natural gas, but having it seep into the ground, and that is not going to be a problem.
No, okay. That's true. It's not going to contaminate the water table.
Let me just touch very briefly on a couple of things that also let me respond to, Nick, and that is, it's easy for us to blame Biden. It's easy for us to blame Trudeau. But really what we have governments that are beholden to an environmental lobby that is using our concern, our legitimate concern, and our desire to be good stewards of our natural environment. They're using that to a large degree against us, and by fomenting fear that really ought not to be there. And as a consequence of that, we have environmental laws. We have at the federal level and at the provincial level, and increasingly at the municipal level, that block pipelines. And so it's not just the federal government. It's not just Trudeau. It's provincial governments. Okay, for instance, the province of Quebec will not allow a liquefied natural gas pipeline to pass through Quebec because they're concerned about quote unquote climate change. And for the life of me, I can't imagine what negative impact. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that all of the worst predictions and all of the worst prognostications on climate change and human influence on the climate are all true, and the alarmists scientific theories end up to be all true. So still, that's not a reason to not have a pipeline. So what we end up having is this is the craziness of the situation. When I say that 77% of oil that we imported in Canada, okay, came from the United States, that's because we import American oil into Eastern Canada because we can't get Western Canadian oil into Eastern Canada.
That's right.
Okay,
That's an energy
that's the
pipeline.
craziness of it.
The insanity is even deeper than that because, first of all, this idea of moving us off fossil fuel, there's been a lot of talk about e-cars and how wonderful they are. And there was a great clip I saw on YouTube or something somewhere, or somebody sent it to me. And what happened was the head of Chevrolet was talking about the new Chevy Volt and how wonderful it was and how easy it is to operate and how cheap it's going to be and how much money you'll save on gas. And somebody said, "So where does the power come from?" And she said, "Well, we plug it into the building here." Well, where's the power for the building come from? Well, that comes from the grid. Where does the grid get it? Oh, I think that comes from Lansing. And then they pursued it further and found out that Lansing produces 98% of its energy from coal. So there's a huge gap in intelligent thought that says, look, if you want to protect the environment, if you want people to be better stewards of the earth, electricity is no greener than coal-fired power plants are, especially modern ones. So, this nonsense about, using this green desire people have to protect Mother Earth because it's the only one we have. Yeah, that's all true. But the point is, we're not protecting it. It's doing fine. We're the ones in trouble because we've lost the ability to think in a linear sense with logic, common sense, and reason, and ask ourselves hard questions and then react to the answers to those questions. Like, does this make sense?
Right.
Let's look at the whole package and find out whether or not what we're doing actually works.
Well,
and if the answer is no, it doesn't, it's not that, yes, Craig, you're absolutely right. Fire up the nuke plants. And I've been watching the conversation going on in the chat room. It's great. They're bantering back and forth about what we're talking about, and then just keep going, guys. It's great. But yeah, why not more nuclear? I mean, yes, there's a problem of nuclear waste, but every time mankind comes up against a technological challenge, which disposal of nuclear waste is, we've always found a way to overcome it. Before Niagara Falls was turned into a hydroelectric dam, people were saying, where's all the hydro going to come from? And then they built the hydroelectric generators at Niagara Falls. What about the Seaway? You can pick thousands of examples of where mankind has been faced with huge challenges and found a way through ingenuity and creativity to overcome them. And I don't see this as any different. How it's going to be done, I don't know, but it will be done. Somebody out there somewhere who's smarter than you and I are going to figure out how to dispose of nuclear waste. And when they do that, man, why don't we build, 100 of them across the country?
Well, we already know how to dispose of nuclear waste. We encase it, we sequester it, we bury it, okay, and on the assumption that it's perfectly safe. The irony is that the people who are against that want to do the same thing with carbon, because this is what carbon sequestration is all about.
Yeah, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard.
You capture CO2, and you do exactly what with CO2 that you're doing with nuclear waste for the most part. The difference being that you're worried that CO2, if it escapes into the atmosphere, is going to have immediate and cataclysmic effects. That a small slow leak in a
nuclear plant,
nuclear waste
waste dump,
wouldn't have, and so it's again, it's nonsensical thinking. But here's the problem, okay? Strictly from an engineering point of view, okay, you can't produce enough electricity. You cannot produce enough electricity with solar power and with wind power in order to feed the demand for electricity that we would have if we were completely electric. And whatever else, okay, you've learned in primary school, please remember this, okay? No matter how much algebra, no matter how much you manipulate things, 2 + 2 in this part of the universe will always equal 4. And 3 + 3 will always equal 6. And if you go, well, if we want to arrive at 2, but we only have 1 plus 1, we are never, sorry, if you want to arrive at 4 and you only have 1 plus 1 or 1 plus 2, you're never going to get to 4. And so that's just basic math. And so the bottom line is this, okay? Unless we can figure out how to produce enough electricity, none of this matters. Forget about upgrading the grid, forget about converting our cars and all that. Okay, we simply don't have the ability to produce enough electricity in order to power our society, okay, quite apart from anything else that's going on. So what is the answer? Sorry to interrupt, Nick, but what is the answer? The answer, frankly, is nuclear power. So if you want to go to a completely electric, electrified economy, okay, and that's going to come with massive technological problems in and of itself, okay?
Right.
But let's say we have a perfect solution. We're able to we've decided we're going to have a completely electrified economy, no more burning of fossil fuel anywhere to produce energy, okay? Well, then you're going to have to go nuclear. That's it. Some of these things are binary because you're not going to be able to produce enough with wind power or solar. And on top of all of that, while everybody is rushing to the solar market, okay, and going, well, we're going to do this with solar, and you drive around, you see these solar farms, okay, ask yourself, first of all, what is the environmental impact of producing those solar panels? Because we're not making them here in Canada, number one, and number two, what are we going to do with those solar panels when they've reached their life expectancy? They're no longer producing electricity anymore, and now we have to get rid of them. Okay, that in itself is going to be a major environmental problem in another 10, 15, maybe 20 years.
It's already happening. You're already seeing it with wind power. With wind power, these tall turbines are now 20 years old plus, and are at the end of the life expectancy, and a lot of them are shut off and are just rusting hulks because, as we warned from the very beginning, there's no money to take these monsters down. You're already seeing that happen. So if you extrapolate from that, what's going to happen with batteries and all this other stuff, 10, 15 years down the road, 20 years down the road, we're going to have the same problem. We won't know what to do with it.
And forget about, on the subject of batteries, forget about problems 10 or 15 years down the road. Just a couple of weeks ago, the fire marshal of the fire department in Vancouver, I believe it was, issued a report that all of the fatalities. I'm now going by memory here, so forgive me if I'm not 100% accurate, but I'm pretty sure that they said that all of the fatalities due to fires so far in 2022 in the city of Vancouver were the result of fires started by batteries in battery-operated vehicles.
I'm not surprised to hear that. Now, let me share you a little insight. Both Allison and I are up here in Sioux Lookout, and we're considering buying a piece of land and putting up a small home on it, something we can move out of an apartment in, and because we've sold we're in the midst of selling the farm down in Eastern Ontario, so taking some of that money and giving ourselves our own little corner up here. So we looked at going solar because on a state level, it's a disaster. On a personal level, if you want solar and wind, I don't care, as long as you're not asking me to pay for it. So we thought we'd look into it because to go off the grid and not have a monthly hydro bill was an attractive idea.
Sure.
It's several times, many more times, in the thousands of dollars more expensive. By the time you put the batteries, the solar arrays, you have to maintain them in the wintertime. And last year we had over 5.5 feet, maybe 6 feet of snow here in Sioux Lookout. So that means every time it snows, excuse me, if you want those solar arrays to collect any energy at all, you got to take basically a great big squeegee and pull the snow off the panels so the sun can get to them.
Right.
And on cloudy days, they don't produce any power at all anyway. So, it just wasn't practical.
Right.
The technology's not there yet.
So you end up having to have some sort of a generator
You have to have a backup generator.
which is going
Absolutely.
to and clearly your generator is not going to run on electricity. So what's it going
No,
to run
that's
on?
exactly right. It's either going to be diesel, gas, or natural, or propane.
In other words, fossil fuel.
Precisely.
Yeah,
That's so you kind of defeat the purpose. So we kind of scrapped that idea when we got looking at the cost, because again, the idea of not having a power bill, but now you've got a gas bill, to run the generator on days. Now it won't be as big as your monthly power bill, but still, the savings isn't as great as people think it is. And by the time you look at stretching this cost out over the lifespan of the building, does it pay for itself? If it does, I would suggest it's barely. And,
right.
you have to change the batteries after 10 years or whatever it is. Battery technology has kind of hit a wall. They're getting better, but until they are able to store massive amounts of energy for immediate turnaround and do quick charging without burning out, you're just not going to get anywhere with off-grid electricity. And that's for cars or homes.
So what's happening, just to sort of put a final sort of exclamation mark on this whole discussion, Nick, is that we're in panic mode. And when you're panicking, you start making bad decisions, okay?
Yep.
I was telling somebody the other day, the single most important characteristic that you look for in a combat soldier, a person who wants to, is the ability to remain as calm as possible under fire. Because if you can be calm, and I'm not saying that it's easy to be calm, but let's say relatively calm under fire. You don't want people that are going to go to pieces and that are going to panic. And that is, my sense is that there's been so much, for a lot of reasons, there's been so much alarmism that's been promoted and fear mongering in order to advance what is largely a political agenda. Okay, whether it's a good political agenda or not is not relevant. What is relevant is that we are in panic mode and we're making bad decisions based on the fact that we're in a panic mode. And what we need to do is we need to step back, okay? We need to hit the pause button on a lot of the things that we're trying to implement. We have to ask ourselves, okay, what is the best policy for us to react to whatever the issue is with respect to climate changing, okay? And I mean, because that's what's driving a lot of this stuff. And we have to ask ourselves, is it really an emergency, or can we just take a little bit of time here and ask ourselves, what is the right policy response? And if we were doing that, I think that we'd agree that a lot of the things that we're doing right now simply are just bad decisions. They're going to come back to haunt us in 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 years.
Well, let me ask you a question, and we'll have to take a break after this. And it's almost rhetorical. When you and I were studying in the Navy and studying damage control and firefighting, what did they say about panic? Do you remember?
Well, panic is I don't remember specifically, but
Short sentence. It was easy. Panic will get you killed.
Yeah.
And that's
yeah.
And now maybe we're not talking about instant death in this case, the way you've laid it out, but people are going to suffer because we panic and make bad choices. Panic is never your friend, I guess is another way to put it.
No,
all right.
You're right. And it doesn't have to be, I said, under fire or in combat, the most important thing when you're at sea is don't panic when you're trying to save the ship.
Precisely.
Okay?
You'll
regardless
die.
of how it got damaged. So look, it's just my advice for whatever it's worth is chill out, slow down. Okay.
And don't panic.
Let's not panic. We have a little bit of time here. Probably we have a lot of time.
Well, the latest I've seen is we got 3 years.
We certainly have a lot more time than the worst prognosticators are predicting.
True enough.
People out there, if you're 20 or 25 years old and you're watching or you're listening, I understand your fear, but understand where I'm coming from. I've been hearing that the climate is going to have cataclysmic change imminently for more than 40 years.
All right. With that, I'm going to stop you there. It's time taking our top of the hour break. That's the end of hour one, folks. Stick around because, like I said, we're cooking with gas now. We'll be back with more with the Nick and Joe Show right after this.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
Okay, second hour Nick and Joe Show straight ahead. I'm Nick, he's Joseph. You can tell because he's the better looking of the two. And we've all kinds of things yet to talk about. So I want to lead off with one of the most monumental decisions to come out of the United States Supreme Court in 40 years, if not longer. And that, of course, is this idea that Roe v. Wade was overturned. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I can't imagine many people in this audience don't know, but in case there's somebody out there listening who doesn't know what Roe v. Wade was, that's where the anti-abortion laws were struck down in the United States, and people interpreted that as enshrining the right of abortion within the U.S. Constitution. That didn't happen. It was bad case law. And this recent court decision overturned that decision and said, no, there is no constitutional right to an abortion in the U.S. Constitution. Now, it got sent back to the individual states. And you've been seeing chaos in the United States since then. But what's important here, for us at least here north of the border in the Great White North, is our reaction to it. I have a clip of our Prime Minister speaking on this issue. But before I play it, I want you to consider this. What in heaven's name has the U.S. Supreme Court and any of its decisions got to do with how we govern ourselves here in Canada? John, if you've got that clip ready, let's roll it.
Today's a difficult day. The judgment coming out of the United States is an attack on women's freedom, and quite frankly, it's an attack on everyone's freedoms and rights. Let me be really, really clear. In Canada, we will always defend women's rights to choose and continue to work to expand access to the full range of reproductive and health and services across the country. But today, I think of those generations of women around the world, and specifically in the United States, who fought so hard to gain rights and continue to fight today to get more and more rights, because there's still so much more work to do, and are facing this devastating setback It shows how much standing up and fighting for rights matters every day, that we can't take anything for granted, that we need to continue to stand strong to defend everybody's rights and freedoms in Canada and where we are here internationally, standing up internationally as well, which Canada will do, whether it's fighting for women's rights here in Africa.
That's really hard to watch. What he has to say is absolute. It's nothing but a word salad.
Or supporting people fighting for their rights.
Really, it is. I mean, when you stop and think about it, how the devil does anything going on in the United States have anything to do with Canada? We govern ourselves in a different system. We have a representative or a parliamentary democracy with a monarch at its head. The Americans have a representative democracy where they elect congressmen and senators and so on. It's a different. It's not dramatically different, but it is different than the way we do things here. And why does he care so much about the rights of a country he has no political say in, but doesn't give a damn about them here in Canada? How many rights has he trampled and walked all over in his tenure as Prime Minister? You don't have to go very far to find examples of that. And yet he cares. Oh, we got to fight this. Why? And it's not over in Canada. Look, every year, the biggest protest in Canada on Parliament Hill is what? It's the right to life protest. They draw 15, 20,000 people, many more times than came to the truckers' protest in January. And yet he's saying, well, we're always going to defend it. Show me where it's written, Joseph. Show me where. In what document? I'm talking about in Canada now, in the British North America Act, Diefenbaker's Bill of Rights, or the Charter of Rights under the Trudeau 1.0, which he spilled ink all over. Where is it written that abortion is a right? It's not. If it's not in there, then how can people extrapolate that?
Well, the Supreme Court hasn't ruled that abortion is a constitutional right in Canada. So,
but he sounds like it is.
Well, in fact, in Morgentaler, the Morgentaler decision in 1988, the Supreme Court actually invited that. Well, let's back up a little bit more. The Morgentaler decision in 1988, the Supreme Court struck down what was then the abortion laws. Abortion was legal in Canada in 1988. It was legalized in Canada in 1967 or 68, maybe 69, when Pierre Trudeau was the Justice Minister, as a matter of fact. But it was not, they legalized it, but they placed restrictions on it. And there were a number of problems with unequal access to abortion, even with the restrictions. So there were a number of issues, and eventually in Morgentaler in 1988, the Supreme Court ruled that the law, the way it was written, was unconstitutional. There were dissenting opinions, but this is the thing that people have to understand, at least in Canada, that people have to understand on the constitutional side of things, was that the Supreme Court ruled or invited Parliament to draft a new law regulating abortion that took into account the issues that had led the court to strike down the law as it had been written. And in fact, Parliament did take that challenge up, and the House of Commons passed legislation. Unfortunately, it didn't pass in the Senate. It failed in the Senate in a tie vote, and the custom is that when a vote is tied in either the Senate or the House of Commons, then the Speaker breaks the tie, and the Speaker always votes in favor of the status quo. And because the status quo was that this legislation had not passed, then it died. Okay, So, and since then, there's been no real attempt on the part of Parliament to tackle the issue. But the main point to bear in mind is that if, in fact, if there was a constitutional right to abortion, then at every stage of pregnancy, then the Supreme Court would not have invited Parliament to write another law. So that's the important thing. So what we are faced with in Canada is we don't actually have any laws governing when an abortion can or cannot be performed. We do have regulations with respect to the medical procedure that are invoked in the various provinces through their colleges of physicians and surgeons. So it's not like it's completely unregulated, but with respect to when you can perform an abortion or not, and taking into account the fact that we're talking about another life, then that's a subject that one would think would fall under the purview of legislation. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, just so that everybody is clear on this, the Supreme Court decision in the United States doesn't take away a woman's right, quote unquote, to have an abortion. All of the Supreme Court has ruled is in Roe versus Wade, or a revisiting of Roe versus Wade, is that in fact the regulation of abortion, whether it's allowed or not allowed, is not a federal subject. It's not something that the federal government should be imposing on the states. So what you have now is you're going to have some states are going to go, women should have the right to an abortion, and we're going to have a right we're going to have abortions. Maybe we'll have unrestricted abortions right up until the time of birth, which is what we have in Canada now. Or if the people in a state say we don't want to have abortion, then they're going to say no abortions, except maybe if the life of the mother's in danger. Okay. So you're going to have both extremes, but most states will probably come out somewhere in the middle. And there's going to be a hodgepodge of this kind of, there's going to be protests, there's going to be debate going back and forth, etc. And look, here it is. The nature of democracy is that on controversial issues like this, the debate will never end. Okay, there are going to be a new generation of people, and they're going to revisit this, whether in the courts or in politics, and that's the way it should be. That's the way democracies should be operating. So people really should keep some perspective over what is going on in the States.
Well, I think.
But the final point, just to reiterate what you were saying, Nick, is that what's it got to do with us? This has nothing to do with us in Canada. Okay, Americans could do whatever they want to do on this stuff. It's their constitution, it's their courts, it's their politics, it's their right to do whatever they're doing. I'm not going to for us to criticize a Supreme Court decision it's childish, quite frankly.
It is certainly uncalled for, to put it that way. But I think that one of the reasons why you're seeing such a huge backlash, not only in the States, well, you're not seeing it in the way that you're seeing in the States, but people are aghast and horrified at what the U.S., especially here in Canada, because Canadians are far better at following American politics than they are about following their own. John and I had quite a conversation about that before the show. People in Canada don't care about our own politics. Otherwise, we would have thrown Justin Trudeau out years ago. Well, and he's got band of bandits and thieves. We would have got rid of Yangmeet Singh, flooded his office with mail to the point where he had to resign over his deals with the devil. But the point I'm making is that the reason why you're seeing such an outcry from, for lack of a better term, the left in the United States and in Canada is because they know the tide is turning. They lost a huge battle. This battle has been going on ever since 1973. The pro-life crowd in the United States and in Canada have been plucking away all along and just keep working it until it got to the Supreme Court. And the other side dragged its feet and stretched it out as long as they could because they knew they were going to lose, and they did lose. And the reason they lost was because of one man with a 4-letter name, Trump, Trump 5. Sorry, I can't count. But the point was, he appointed 3 pro-life judges to the real conservative judges to the Supreme Court, and that's how come this decision was overturned. And it was a wonderful thing to see. And the left is losing their mind over it all over the world, not just in the United States. If you follow this story in Europe, they all have the same attitude. It's a great blow against women's rights. Really? Are you serious? Since when, where does this right come from? And that was the genesis of my question at the top of the segment to you was, where is this right enshrined? And the answer is, it's not.
Well,
they want you to think it is. They keep telling you it is. But a woman has no more right to abortion than I have a right to who knows what else. There's some things are rights, and they are encoded. They are written down. And take the Canadian Charter. We have the right to freedom of assembly. We're supposed to. We're supposed to have the right to free speech. We're supposed to have the right of freedom of movement. We're supposed to have the right to worship as we want to, and all kinds of different things are encoded in our charter. That's not on the list, either here or in the United States. And that's why they're so furious. They got beat on a core issue, and they know it, and they're losing. People are turning more conservative over time, and that's driving them crazy.
Well, that's a subject for a whole show right there, Nick. I'm not convinced that people are turning more conservative. In fact, I'm deeply troubled by the underlying liberal attitudes, if you will, or foundations of a lot of what passes today as conservatism. And I think that's, as I said, that's a subject for a whole show perhaps. But it's really problematic because it really undermines our ability as conservatives to articulate a truly conservative position on many issues, because we're so caught up in what really is a liberal philosophical agenda. But let's set that aside for a moment. I'm not going to defend the decision of the Supreme Court in the United States in Roe versus Wade, or any of the decisions that have been made here that touch peripherally on abortion. Let me just say this: that the Supreme Court of the United States didn't actually rule in Roe versus Wade that a woman had a right to an abortion. It was a privacy rights issue, that abortion was the main subject within which this debate over privacy rights was handled, and on purpose. Okay, so the people who wanted to expand abortion rights were making the argument that laws against abortion violated some of the constitutional privacy rights. So the real question has been, where in the Constitution does it say you have the right to privacy? Okay, and we're talking the American Constitution, but we could just as easily be talking about our Constitution here in Canada. But here's the thing. Okay, I'm not looking at this as winning and losing. Okay, if you want to look at it that way, that's fine. But this is the nature of democratic government, okay? Like it or not, okay, these issues don't go away. And in fact, part of the problem has been for us who are more or less pro-life is that there's been a concerted effort to stifle debate. And that is fundamentally undemocratic. So whatever your position is with respect to the decision of the Supreme Court in the United States, or how this plays out in the various states as they now decide what their position is going to be within the states on abortion rights, okay, whatever your view is, remember that that's the way democracy is supposed to work. And
when I say that people are becoming more conservative, I'm looking at our immigration policy in the U.S. and in Canada. In the U.S., the southern border is wide open and people are flooding into the border, millions per month. And the idea behind what the Democrats, I'll deal with Canada in a second, but in the States, the Democrats are hoping these people will remember who let them in and gave them the right to vote, even though they don't deserve it because they're not citizens. It's like you and I going down there and trying to vote. We don't have that right because we don't pay taxes there. We don't live there. We have no dog in the hunt, so to speak. But what they don't seem to realize is the people they're bringing in are far more conservative than even some of the Republicans. They're very pro-family. They're very pro-education as far as basic math. They don't want CRT taught to their kids. They don't want any of that nonsense. And they're turning to the Republicans for answers. Now, north of the border, here in Canada, we're bringing in large groups of people from countries where they have much more traditional views. Let's take the Islamic world as an example. Do you think the Islamic world is interested in gay rights? Do you think the Islamic world is interested in a whole host of things that are pet peeves and pet projects of the liberal left here in Canada? Absolutely not. But they think that people will vote, for the people who brought them in. That might have worked 50, 60 years ago, but I think it's going to backfire on them a big time. I think they're making a huge miscalculation, and we'll have to see how that plays out in the future. But my hunch is, in both cases, both countries are making a big mistake if they think bringing in floods of people. Why do people want to come here in the first place? Ask yourself that question. Why are people crowding, slipping through border fences and crossing straits on little boats and hanging off aircraft trying to get to North America? The answer is because they want the lifestyle and the freedom that comes with that. And they know that. They come from despotic hellholes around the world. And they look at North America as some kind of heaven, and they don't want to go back to the way they used to live because some socialist ideologue in power wants to inflict that on them. I think they're making a big mistake here, Joseph. I really do.
Well, the way you framed it, perhaps they are, but I'm not talking about the political fallout one way or the other. What I am saying is, and I think that you've illustrated the point inadvertently, Nick, when you talk about the fact that they want freedom and we talk about gay rights and all this stuff, and that's very much a liberal agenda. But it's more than that. It's a liberal agenda. What it is it's framing the debate based on liberal premises, and that is that somehow or other the rights that we have are somehow or other tied into government policy or anything like that. And then it becomes a question of, well, should the government step in to create rights, to enforce rights, etc. And in order to have what is, I think, what we would all agree, whether we're on the left or the right of the political spectrum, we're pursuing, I think, what we ought to be pursuing, and that is a good society. What is the common good? But I think that conservatives, traditional conservatism, or what I might even characterize as genuine conservatism, doesn't really. We're not really in that. We don't regard the argument of liberty as being the way it's framed. For us, liberty is a very different. We have a very different understanding of what freedom means for us. For genuine conservatives, freedom is not a question of how much government control we have over is controlling us. The question of how free we are is a question of how well we are as individuals in restraining our own behavior, and we tend to lose sight of that a little bit. It's more a locus of control argument. I'm not articulating it very well, and perhaps, as I said, if we had a show dedicated to this or a whole segment dedicated to this, I'd give it a little bit more thought and I'd be able to explain it a little bit better. But the bottom line is this: our definition of liberty is very different from the liberal definition of liberty, and there's a real danger for self-styled conservatives to frame the debate over between conservatism and liberalism as a debate over rights. It's because that's somehow or other what the debate is about, and I'm saying, well, no, it's not. Our definition, as I say, of freedom is very different. We don't believe in freedom in the same way that liberals believe in freedom. And the danger in using their understanding of freedom is that we get into more of a libertarian area where we're saying, well, the more conservative you are, the more you believe in greater freedom, that is to say, less and less government control. Well, that's all very fine and dandy, but a society has to have constraints. A society has to have guardrails, if you will. And so where are those guardrails? And that's the thing that unfortunately conservative leaders today, I'm not speaking necessarily political leaders, but I'm also thinking thought leaders, they never really get into that whole question as to, okay, well, if the government isn't controlling our behavior, then where exactly should those controls come from? And I would argue that, we look at tradition and we say, well, we've understood how people should behave, and we've managed to muddle through and have a pretty decent society along the way. And so we should have a greater respect for tradition, and we should have a greater respect, frankly, for religious teaching as well than we do. But conservatives are afraid to talk this way. Conservative thought leaders are afraid to talk this way. So
those are well-made points. There's no doubt about that. Nobody's selling the idea or making the case for real conservatism out in the marketplace these days. There are a few who are trying, whether Roman Baber's one, Pierre Poilievre in certain aspects. I don't know how deep his conservatism runs and how broad-based it is. Is he a fiscal conservative? I'm not sure what his stand on life in general is, but he's far more conservative than the liberals are. So there needs to be somebody stand up on the national stage and say, okay, we know what liberalism is, and here's what conservatism is, and this is why it's better. And whether that's political or social, the truth is that living a conservative lifestyle is better than living a socialist one. And make that argument. Nobody's doing it. Other than you and I, we get into it once in a while, but who else out there is there that's doing that job? And it needs to be done.
Yeah, I think it was Craig. I think Craig just mentioned that that our behavior is shaped by our laws, but the truth is that under the conservative sort of paradigm, it's actually the opposite.
The opposite, yeah.
It's our laws should be
shaped by our behavior.
Yeah. And so what we want to do is, if you want the government to be butting out of your life, okay, then you have to show a certain amount of self-restraint. And so, the fact is, well, here's a perfect example, and I know we're butting up against a break time here, but abortion in Canada wasn't made illegal until I think it was 1871. So the question is, well, what did we do before abortion was illegal, was in the criminal code? And the answer is, well, some people still had abortions, okay? But the thing was that it was unacceptable in society. And so for all of the reasons that we fight, that the pro-life advocates and activists are arguing that we should have laws against abortion, the real question is why are people having abortions in such large numbers in the first place? And that's because it's, well, A, from a policy point of view, it's because it's free, and B, because from a social point of view, it's because it's acceptable. And so now all of a sudden the fight becomes a fight over what the law should be, as opposed to what people's attitude should be. Is abortion wrong, or is it right? Okay, and if it's wrong, then we should be that should be what we are saying. Abortion is wrong. Abortion is wrong. and the law should reflect that. But even if the law doesn't reflect it, there's no reason why society should have so many abortions. It's
True.
just become acceptable, and so many things have become acceptable. And then what we do is, when we see the consequences out there, and I'm not talking here about abortion, but I could be talking about many other things, then
Right.
we struggle in order to find a way to have the law. Well, for instance, I remember when they had the Enron, the Enron
Scandal.
boondoggle years ago.
Yep.
Okay, and all of a sudden we were hearing experts telling us, well, what we really need is, we really have to look at universities courses, and we have to have business ethics courses taught at university. And my answer to that was no. The fact is that people shouldn't be doing what they're doing already, because innately they feel that it's wrong to do. We shouldn't have to have the government pass a law that says you have to act ethically in business, okay? And the reason why we have to have the government pass a law in so many areas is because we've lost our capacity and even our demand as a society that people act within the constraints of ethical behavior.
All right, Joseph, I got to stop you there because we're way over time for a break.
Sorry, guys.
We'll be back with more, and we're going to talk about more lack of ethics with the RCMP when we get right back after this.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right, welcome back, folks. This is the Nick and Joe Show, as you've probably figured out by now. I was looking at our some of our demographic information about the show. Did you know that we're heard in over 12 countries around the world?
Just 12?
Yeah, just 12. Everywhere from Ghana to there was Ghana, several European countries, South America, the United States, obviously Canada, a couple others. I don't have the information right in front of me, but I was just surprised. Now, obviously, a lot of these people are expats just tuning in to find out what's going on at home and that kind of thing. But I just thought it was rather interesting. Our audience is much wider than I gave it credit for. Anyway, that said, there's been an ongoing inquiry in Ottawa about information leaked by the RCMP to the media about the shootings in Nova Scotia. Now, I think, if I'm smart, here it is. Okay. There's a clip that I want John to play that'll kind of lay it out for you. This involves Bill Blair, the Minister of Safety. I think he's the
Public
Emergency
safety.
Preparedness Minister. That's what he is. And he's going to lay it out. This clip will lay out what's going on, and then we'll talk about it. So, John, if you've got that clip ready, go ahead and roll it.
TV's Ottawa Bureau Chief Joyce Napier on the accusations from a conference call in the days after 22 people were killed.
Me as the director, I'm not really also considering about political pressure.
Leah Scanlon, a former member of the RCMP, testifying earlier this month. And now a letter she wrote to the RCMP commissioner is backing up the claim that Brenda Lucki pressured investigators to release information on the weapons used in the Nova Scotia mass shooting to help push forward the Trudeau government's gun ban. Almost a year after the tragedy, Scanlon wrote to Brenda Lucki about a heated meeting with the Nova Scotia RCMP division. You informed us of the pressures and conversations with Minister Bill Blair, which we clearly understood was related to the upcoming passing of gun legislation. I remember a feeling of disgust. You didn't think our communications were strategic and believed we had let the boys down, referring to the two young boys whose parents were brutally murdered in front of them. Our focus was on the families and the boys, not on the legislation.
Obviously, we're concerned to the extent that we hope that doesn't impact the work that we're doing here, and that it doesn't turn into some form of political theater.
The Mass Casualty Commission revealed similar allegations against Lucki, Blair, and the Prime Minister's office made by Nova Scotia RCMP Superintendent Darren Campbell. Today, Blair stated that he did not put any pressure on the RCMP, but he did question the Mounties' communication strategy. Canadians, including those directly impacted by the tragedy, have expressed concerns about when and how the RCMP shared information with the public. Commissioner Lucki denied once again today that she tried to interfere with the investigation in Nova Scotia. And now both Blair and Lucki will be called to testify before the commission in Halifax. Lisa?
All right, Joyce, and no date on that yet. Thanks for this tonight.
All right, so that gives you some sense of the story. We're all familiar with the shooting, but what was going on behind the scenes? And I cannot understand, because you've got two people who are very close to the scene, one on the ground on site, the other one, the superintendent for the region, telling us that both Bill Blair and the commissioner pressured them to release information relevant to an investigation about the kind of firearms used in the shooting so that it would bolster Justin Trudeau's gun ban. This is against the law. This is interfering with a police investigation, and it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a minister, a commissioner, or a private citizen, or member of some other agency. You cannot interfere with an investigation without suffering criminal penalties. So I think that what you're seeing here, Joseph, is the end of Bill Blair as a minister, and I think charges should be laid and have his day in court. Absolutely let him have his day in court. The same thing with the commissioner. Have them both charged with interfering with a police investigation and let the chips fall where they may. This cannot be allowed to stand. This is a violation of a fundamental part of our judicial system, is that you don't release information, because if it gets out and it taints your information, that evidence gets tossed, and now it changes the whole outcome of the case. And this is just bad, as my wife would say, bad juju. This is just bad news. These two have to go.
Oh dear, oh dear. Okay, brace yourselves. And that's not just directed at you, Nick.
Let me put my seatbelt on.
Okay, put your seatbelt on. I'm not sure that I agree entirely with your assessment for a couple of reasons. The first is that from a communications point of view, certainly anything I've seen so far has been a criticism of the communications practice used by the RCMP in Nova Scotia around this particular crime, and there is plenty of criticism that's been going around about how they communicated with the public on this during the event itself. So I'm not entirely convinced that any criticism with respect to the communications that were practiced by the RCMP on site or in Nova Scotia during and in the immediate aftermath of the event, that they were necessarily motivated by the desire to pass legislation. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm saying that it's not clear to me. It's not obvious to me. But the second thing, so that's the first thing. And there were a lot of communication problems there were lots of problems with the way communications were being handled on the ground on that particular day. There were problems, and there's a lot of justified criticism, and hopefully, we're going to have probably better protocols set up in order to ensure that there isn't a repeat. If, God forbid, we see this similar circumstances again developing with respect to a shooter at large and traveling around, basically the countryside, picking targets and murdering them. Setting that aside, again, I'm not convinced. And, I know people are going to go, well, you're defending the Liberals. There you go. And I'm not defending the Liberals. I'm not defending Bill Blair, not defending the commissioner. What I am saying is that I don't see immediately how this is interfering with a police investigation. Even if the idea was, can we please have we're interested in passing this piece of legislation. I think it would help if the public knew what weapons were used, and we would like you to release that information. I haven't seen anything that is anywhere close to that explicit, but even if it was that explicit, I'm not convinced that that's somehow or other rises to the level of being a criminal interference in a police investigation. I mean, the fact is, we're just saying there's no evidence here, or that there's no tainting of evidence or anything like that when you're talking about releasing the information as to with respect to what weapons were used in this.
All right, let me jump in here, and I want to make 2 points.
Sure.
First of all, I think Chris is right. His last comment was, while the investigation is being made, leaking evidence is breaking the law. I think he's absolutely right. And this is evidence. What kinds of weapons were used plays a role in how this will all be investigated and what the eventual outcome of the trial will be. Was he using a slingshot, or was he using, an M60 machine gun? So, yeah, I do think it rises to that standard. Did I say? I'm sorry, Craig. I got his name wrong. I can't read. Anyway, the other thing is, you and I both know that there was a time in this country when ministers not only avoided scandals, but the appearance of scandals. And if it happened, they threw themselves on their sword.
Yeah.
Those days are gone. I get it. But this is a classic example of exactly that. Well, it's time for him, because of the controversy swirling around him, whether he's innocent or guilty, he needs to, at the very least, step down until this is finished. He has no interest in doing that.
Okay, that's not a bad point, but you're talking about a different set of standards. Whether or not the minister should have made the phone call and should step down as a consequence of it, because there are questions that are circulating, legitimate questions, with respect to the intent and the motivation behind making those calls. That's a fair observation to make, and perhaps he should step down. I'm just saying, I'm not sure that I agree that he should be criminally charged. That's all I'm saying. I don't see.
Well,
I don't see how this is. I don't see how
No, I'm not okay. Trial, but in different vein. Yes, you're right. The shooter's dead, but we're not talking about the shooter right now. We're talking about the RCMP commissioner and Bill Blair, the minister of whatever portfolio.
But the position that you're taking is predicated on the belief that somehow or other it was going to impact negatively the criminal investigation. And I'm saying, okay, well, take away the criminal investigation and the argument goes away.
Okay, but you can't take away the criminal investigation, I don't think, because of the point that Gregory makes. He says you don't think that the foreign suspects that are importing illegal weapons into this country aren't watching and going to react. Yeah, I do. And this is the whole point. This is part of the reason why you don't leak evidence, because the bad guys are watching this too. And I think Gregory makes a good point. So this is, again, going back to protocols, right? The reason why investigations unfold the way they do, you don't talk about the intimate details of it. You can talk about it in vague generalities, but you don't get into specifics because it could affect not only the outcome of the case, but how other criminals are going to react to it. So, because there's a whole industry in importing smuggled weapons into this country. And that's all. You could do a whole show on just that.
Well,
so I'm not going to back down
Nick.
from my point that I think these guys should be charged and let the chips fall where they may. If he turns out he's innocent, he's innocent. But you can't. You can't. Sure. As a minister, you are held to a higher standard. You're right about a different standard. Yes, he's a minister. He should know better,
but not a higher criminal standard. And I'm having difficulty, and I appreciate the observations with respect to criminals and importation of firearms, etc. But I'm having difficulty connecting the dots. I don't see how the police releasing information about what type of weapon was used somehow or other prejudices anything else that's going on with respect to the illegal firearms trade. Look, how often do we see shootings in the United States, for instance, where the police or anywhere else that go to Toronto, there's a shooting in Toronto. The police don't say, well, we're not releasing information about that weapon because it might, it just isn't done.
Well, they don't talk about the weapons at all.
No, they'll say that if somebody says what they for sure talk about weapons.
Well, they'll say, an example, there's a drive-by shooting and, it might be a pistol. It might be things like that was used, but they don't get into the specifics.
In a case of a drive-by shooting, you're talking about the police are looking for that suspect. So I can see perhaps there is something there, but take the shooting in Las Vegas, where this guy locked himself in a hotel room and started shooting people at a concert down or at a festival.
Yeah, I remember
that a few years ago. I think there were 40 or 50 people that were killed. Okay. Yeah. Well, we knew right away what weapons they used because part of the police press conference was they were showing us what kind of weapons were used. And it didn't make a difference. So even if this person had been caught alive and went on trial, it wouldn't have made a difference because it wouldn't have prejudiced the case. So listen, all I'm saying is this, okay? I'm not defending the minister's actions. It was poor judgment to call, and it's particularly poor judgment for the minister to call if the motivation is to get information because he wants to help the legislative agenda. That's not the role of the police, and they shouldn't be dragged into the political legislative process.
I think you're right. Fair. That's a bigger point.
That's fair. All I'm saying is that I don't think from anything that I've seen so far, heard, that anything that the minister did or the commissioner did rises to the level of criminal interference. That's the only point I guess I'm making.
Okay, well, I will admit that sometimes in the heat of passion, you overlook the big point because you get caught up in the weeds. I'm thinking that this is the police being used to forward that political agenda, which has no basis in fact. Like there's no demonstrable good that comes from banning the kind of ban that Justin Trudeau put out, because it's the same old saw. It's the same old story. Bad guys don't register their guns, and they certainly don't care about new gun laws. They're going to do what they're going to do, no matter what we do as far as restricting firearms to law-abiding citizens.
I agree.
So on that score, but at the very least, they should both resign over the way this is held, if not charged criminally. And I'm still not ready to give up on that completely. But I will say that as far as removing them from their post, absolutely. No question in my mind at all. They both need to go. And Justin Trudeau needs to apologize and rescind that ban, because it does nothing to make Canadians safer. And if I hear him say that one more time, I'm going to puke. We're doing this to make Canadians safer. Oh, really? And how does that work? I'm sick of it.
And on that note, Nick.
Joseph, it's just the stuff I've always believed. And when you do something, there should be 3 ingredients: common sense, logic, and reason. And if you have those 3 ingredients, then go ahead and do it. It's like when we were in the service, a lot of times we would get tasked doing something that it was either hurry up and wait or stand by to stand by. A lot of times you'd ask yourself, why are we doing this? This doesn't make any sense. Now, usually the higher ups had some kind of game plan in mind to teach you a lesson, make you a better sailor or whatever it was. You didn't see it at your level, but when you went up the ladder and you got a better overview, okay. But you can't make that case in these particular cases. First of all, we're not in the service anymore. And secondly, there's no way you can scientifically make the case that this ban is going to make Canadians safe, because the bad guys among us are still going to use them, are still going to smuggle them in. They're flying them over the border with drones now. How are we supposed to stop that? We're going to ban drones? No, that's not going to happen. Well, so it's nothing but window dressing. It's nothing but symbolism. It doesn't mean anything. It just makes life harder for those of us who want to own and use firearms safely.
I agree with you, Nick. I agree with you completely.
Well,
the answer is the answer. I don't know. I mean, I have opinions on this, but not now.
we don't have the time.
We don't have the time. Yeah.
We could listen when it comes to firearms and firearm control. I mean, they're trying to pass some kind of legislation in the States now. It's gone through the Congress. I don't know anything about the bill. I don't know what restrictions are involved in. But again, it's the same story. What's that?
It passed and it's been signed into law, and there were no restrictions. It has.
So what was the point?
Well, it has to do with better background checks, etc., and some restrictions with respect to people who have mental illness and things like that. Okay.
They already do that.
Well, they don't do it everywhere uniformly, so it's federal legislation now. So I think that's the point.
All right, fine. If that's what they want to do, it's their dog and pony show. But
it is. And again, if you agree with it, fine. If you don't agree with it, well, there's a process.
We're not going to change their attitudes about that's not from up here. That's for sure. But it just coming back north. I mean, to take a duck hunter or somebody who shoots partridge or goes out moose hunting and say, you can't have that weapon because it has one too many bullets in it. Yeah, you ever shoot a moose? You better make sure you've got more than one, because if you don't get him the first time, he's going to get you.
Well, that's true.
Yep. Or if you have somebody in a home who wants to defend themselves because the cop takes 15 minutes to get there and you're 14 minutes dead by the time he rolls up if you don't have a firearm in the house. That's the other side.
Yeah, and those are the other side of the argument.
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, guess what? We have pretty much run the table, I think. I'm trying to think if there's anything we can tease them with about next week. We haven't even discussed what we're going to do next week. Are you going to be available next week? Do you know? Do you know what your schedule looks like?
I do not know what my schedule looks like next week. I'm sorry I missed last week, but I had a great. I was on a different show. Sorry, guys, but I had agreed months ago to appear on this show, and we ended up talking a lot about so many different things, legislation, conservatism, etc. So it was an interesting time, and we had they did it through Zoom, and we had a Q&A, so I was able to answer questions and take people. Some people took some shots at me from right across the country, but there it is.
Philosophical shots, I hope.
Only philosophical shots, and I'm careful. I want to be careful because that terminology could lead to.
That's why I made the point.
Philosophy being banned by this current government.
Yeah. That's what we went over last week, was this new bill C11 and the impact it could have on the internet. So we won't.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that last week too on this other show, and
it was great to have Chris, because Chris and both Chris and John joined me, and it was a great show. So for those of you who haven't heard it, go back and listen to it, and don't forget to spread this amongst your friends and your enemies and whoever. Just let them know the show's out there, and that we certainly are welcome. We welcome all points of view, and by the time they're done, they'll agree with us.
Or not, we don't care.
Yeah, just have them listen. Growing the show is our biggest priority right now. So
this is our show, right? We don't care. You tune in to listen to us.
That's right.
We're interested in your opinion, but in the final analysis.
Well, we want their opinion aligned with ours.
Yeah, I'm only joking.
Education. I know you.
We want you guys to tell your friends and our enemies.
That's right. Absolutely. Bring them on is all I got to say.
Bring them on.
All right. Thanks, Joseph, for being here tonight. Thanks, John. You did a great job as always. And to the rest of you, have a great night. It's been a pleasure. Glad to see you in the busy chat room tonight. And we'll see you all again next week. Same place, same time. In the meantime, ubi caritas et amor, Dea sibi est. Good evening. God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace. And may you have a fair wind and a following sea.